It's Wizards versus Lesbians, a podcast for your ears. Hello and welcome to Wizards versus Lesbians. My name is Isaac.
I'm Alexis.
And today we are discussing Siren Queen by Nevo.
Yes.
I'm excited to talk about this one. Would you like to do the plot or shall I?
The short version of the plot is that a young Chinese American girl whose family owns a laundry is desperate to become a movie star in old school Hollywood. So she steals her sister's name and, with some blackmail, bargains her way into old school Hollywood, except with mythical creatures and fairies and everybody desperate for both metaphorical and literal immortality.
Yep.
Also,
that
she's a
sounds
lesbian.
good to me. Yes, I mean that almost goes without saying at this point.
Yes.
I would say that in fact it definitely goes without saying at this point.
I suppose that is the next thing we get. You know, we will be
Yes.
addressing that in just a moment. So.
In just a moment. Yeah, no, I would.
But she's like really a lesbian.
Mm-hmm. The only thing that I would add is that we are in fantasy interwar Hollywood in the same way that we have been in like fantasy India or fantasy China or et cetera, et cetera. But other than that, that pretty much covers it, I would say.
Yes, I mean this is a closer. This is fantasy in interwar Hollywood, like the late UN was, fantasy late UN China in She Who Became the Sun.
Exactly.
I mean,
a little bit more magic.
A little bit further apart because there's way more mythology and fairy magic, and because I believe that every single person, Hollywood director or star in here is made up, though presumably most of them are based on actual people.
They're 100%
there's an ironic thing going on
up.
here. There's an ironic thing going on here where I know way more about the fall of the UN and the rise of the Ming Dynasty than I do about interwar or really any era of Hollywood. So I can, tell you which parts of She Who Became the Sun are based on, actual history and which ones are fictionalized. But with this, I mostly have to go, I feel like this is probably a reference to somebody, but I have no idea who.
Yes. I can say that the all of the people are 100% made up in this book. They're types. And you may get your touchstone like here and there, but as a sort of a side note, the author is very good at coming up with the kind of names that actors and actresses had or gave themselves in this era. So everybody sort of sounds like you couldn't quite remember the name of, say, Rock Hudson, and so you put together a name that was kind of like that. Are there wizards in this book?
Oh yeah.
Are there lesbians?
I mean, the director. Oh yeah.
No,
The movie directors are straight up, and producers are straight up wizards, and our main character is very much definitely a lesbian, including
Yes.
like going to lesbian bars.
Yeah, and they fight, and it really hits all of the notes that we have come
It
to
really
expect
does,
from
and
Wizards versus Lesbians,
and yet in a very different setting than we've come to
we're
expect.
used to. Yes.
Yeah.
Why should you read this book?
It's good. I mean,
Agreed.
Nevo is a good writer. It's I have some minor quibbles, but by and large, I think it's really well written. It's it's got some really fascinating. It handles world building really well, in that there's a lot of stuff which she's totally willing to just leave unexplained. And I think that does a very good job of contributing to the sort of, dreamlike fairy feel of this. It feels, there's parts that are there's like genuine tension and menace. And I feel like Luli is a really good example of the sort of what people, of an unlikable or not unlikable, but she's not a good person necessarily.
Yeah.
And she does a lot of bad things, but
Yes.
and it's still a really compelling story, even though basically everybody in it, with a couple of exceptions, are just not like great people. But, it manages to have, like, I feel like she does a very good job of capturing a lot of that sort of sense of Hollywood glamour. And that sort of, well, you wouldn't necessarily want to know any of these people, but you still can't quite look away.
Yes, I agree. For the thing that I liked most about this book, and the thing that I would sort of use as my tag if I were recommending it to people who listen to this podcast, is that it does the same culturally derived magic thing that a lot of the books that we've complained about do, but I think it actually does it well, which I don't think any other of the books that we've complained about you doing this have done. And part of that is because it acknowledges the cultural conversation and cultural interpenetration. Like the example...
It really, because so much of this magic comes out of, cultural interplay.
Yes, exactly.
Like the railroad magic, like her mother's railroad magic.
Yes, like the dolls that are like half, traditional Chinese, whatever that means, and half Appalachian witchery. It's like it goes together, or not Appalachian, Colorado, but in this case. But yes, no, I think that it does a much better job with examining those ideas than any other book that we've read so far. And
I think another thing it does, well, we can. I want to talk more about this post spoiler zone, because I think that there's some other interesting things going on there with the cultural magic idea.
Yes. Why shouldn't you read this book?
I mean, I guess if what we've said makes it sound like a book that you wouldn't like, then I guess don't read it. If you're listening to this podcast and you've been reading the kind of books that this podcast reviews, and you have to be, or why would you be listening to this podcast? Then you'll probably like this one. It's just very good. There's some spots. I feel like the pacing kind of lags in the last third.
Yeah, I would say that my only, I feel like the characterization is above average, the prose is above average, the ideas
world building is above average.
The ideas in world building are way above average.
Right.
The plotting is not, to me. I think that the major
plotting
weakness,
is not.
The major weakness the book has is, as you say, particularly in the last act, and the denouement is a little bit of a letdown, and that is particularly an issue because the book draws attention to the importance of endings on its way to getting there. But that's
right, and so it lags in spots, and then the end feels very rushed. Which it's interesting. This is not her first full-length novel, but I believe it's her second, and her first one was a queer retelling of The Great Gatsby, set basically in the same kind of world as this. So,
yes.
She had kind of another book to borrow the, plot structure off of.
Yeah.
On the other hand, it's really short.
Yes. My note on this, for my notes here, is this author's preoccupations are fascinating. I love people who are really into stuff that I'm not into at all, but in a way that makes it compelling for me.
Right. It's so I will say one thing about this book, which isn't going to have much meaning for you, but may for some of our listeners, is that if you liked the Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, then you will probably like this book because it's dealing with a sort of queer old Hollywood. And if you were deeply disappointed by the Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, then you're also likely to like this book because it's doing some of the same stuff, but way better and way more thoughtfully. The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo is a non-magical story about sort of golden age Hollywood actress who is queer.
Yeah, and I'm just going to throw Millennium Actress in there, even though it's not a queer story.
Yes, even though it's not a queer story, but it's similar vibes in that it's this sort of love letter to film, but while still being really cognizant of all the ways in which, film is an imperial project and chews people up and spits them out, particularly women, and the ways that
yes.
that film is used by imperial powers to prey on others, and that within the world of film, women, it often preys on women. So yeah, also if you liked Millennium Actress, this might be appealing to you as well.
Satoshi Kon was the best anime director ever. R.I.P. Content warnings, sexual assault up the wazoo. Both
Yes.
literal and magical sexual assault. The threat, it's one of those where it never happens to the main character. It happens off screen. Kind of books,
but
it's the threat that's hanging over everything all the time. Also,
it's the threat that's hanging over everything all the time. It does happen to named characters, and you get to see the effects of it on named characters. And it's the threat of it hangs over our main character all the time, and it feels like a genuine threat.
Yep. And just as a more general matter, slavery, child abduction. Yes. Mental, brainwashing and mind erasing, all, and body horror, a certain amount of body horror, non-consensual surgery.
Yeah, there's
there's a lot of upsetting stuff in here also.
Yeah.
Oh, and I should, before we move on to the spoiler zone, I should say, if you like fairy tales, you'll find a lot of fairy tale content in here to vibe with as well. Have I forgotten anything? Slightly weird handling of black actresses in that period of Hollywood. I thought it was a bit clumsy, but at least she brought it up.
So I think that's probably most. Oh, abusive parents. It wouldn't be a Wizards versus Lesbians book if there wasn't some abusive parenting.
Yeah. Sure enough. Okay, shall we move on to the spoiler zone then?
Let's.
Spoiler zone. Late breaking emergency jingle. You may have heard that the Chinese-American actress Anna May Wong is about to receive a commemorative quarter in her honor. Now she and Lu Li share some biographical details, including Anna being called CCC, short for Curious Chinese Child. Growing up working in her parents' laundry, struggling with a racist society, typecasting, becoming a gay icon after her death. It's inspiration, not biography, but it's weird that we don't mention anime once in this episode, so I'll tell you for why. I, to my shame, didn't know she was, and Alex didn't want to be like, well, this character is obviously inspired by the only Chinese-American actress I've heard of from the silent film era. Anyway, later I say that Lu Li would have been playing Japanese villains during the war, but Anime herself played heroic Chinese resistance figures. But also Lu Li embraced her villainy in a way that Anime never did. So hey, I guess that's all that I wanted to say. All right. So, God, I just cannot say enough about how much I love this book setting and world building.
You know, we also had a lot to love about the world building in When the Tiger Came Down the Mountain, which is an utterly different setting in basically every possible way, but is also very good world building. This is clearly something that she's just good at. Yes,
I'm very impressed with this author's range based on the two pieces that we've read for her and the other stuff that I've checked out by her. But I was going to say that, like, I think that finding the, it's right there, but like, I don't know if I've ever seen it before. I'm sure somebody must have been doing it before, but glamour. Um,
Right.
what two things? Where does glamour intersect? You know, basically, this book is the Fae run Hollywood. They come and steal your children and turn them into studio changelings.
Right. Well,
They
and the thing is that I've definitely read bad 90s urban fantasy along that premise, and it's bad because it's
yes,
just like, very sort of cookie cutter ideas of, elves just sort of pasted on to uh, you know, you paste it onto
yes,
Hollywood. And this is much more thought through of sort of looking at the ways in which, contracts and exploitation and weird rules and, people drugging your drinks are an element in both fairy tales and and in Hollywood.
yeah, no, exactly. Like there's some of it which is really blatant and is so sort of head smackingly obvious, and I'm like, why didn't this occur to me before? And there's some of it that's like really nicely subtle. The retelling of the old fairy tale about take off your shirt, take off your skin as a casting couch allegory was just
Right.
fantastic, just
It
fantastic.
was fantastic. And it's funny because, that's something that's just sort of worked in, it's just worked into like a little bit of sort of background world building. And it's not something that happens to our main character. And then we get this great little sort of pivot moment where Luli is, saying, well, in that case, why did you just take a part? Why didn't you take the director's chair from him?
Yeah, yeah, which tells us something important about Luli. Incidentally, I like that we're just calling her Luli because I can't remember what her name was before she was called
No,
Luli.
it's not in the book. It's specifically not in the book. She says at one point, "I have a name." Yeah, of course, I had a name. I still have it written down somewhere and tucked away in my keepsakes. But at no point do we learn her actual name. She
Right,
doesn't get named for us until she steals her sister's name, and then her
which
sister,
is great.
has to figure out what she's going to do now and pick a
I
new name
love
for
her sister,
herself.
by the way.
Which is
What a great
also,
character.
oh, her sister's great. Which is also sort of a great commentary on, the way that immigrants, particularly Asian immigrants, have, had to drop their names and take on new ones to succeed. And for her sister, the artist, that works. And for Luli, she, since exoticism is part of what they do with her, stardom. So she ends up having being given a Chinese name, but it's still not her name.
Right, exactly, because nobody gets to keep their name, and that's another like really obvious duh. Here, where these two worlds intersect, because like giving the Fae your name is a huge deal, or telling a wizard your true name
Right,
is a huge
exactly.
deal, and like the
Exactly.
and yeah, you say specifically Chinese, but it was of course all immigrants. This was the point where you weren't really white if you were named like if you had a Polish or a Romanian name, as a few people in this
Right. I mean,
book have,
poor
and
poor
so
Greta, they keep trying to rename Carolyn Carlson.
yeah, she's like, no. I love Greta too because it's like,
Greta's a fantastic character.
yeah, like speaking of and it's like as what you were saying before, it's like these Greta is there's a way in which like Greta is sort of selfish and sort of monstrous, as is the way of her people. That poor
Mm-hmm.
boy, and she's like upset about what is happening to the poor boy, but she's not going to do anything about it. Um, and like, and is but is also like this great friend to Luli, and
Well, and she does eventually rescue that poor boy.
well, rescue.
Right, right. I mean, of course, then hauls
She
him
gains
off to
ownership of that boy from the from
right.
the uh,
But
from the studio.
he does. For what it's worth, he seems a lot happier with her than he was about to be sacrificed to hell. Um,
Yes, it's
you
definitely
know,
an upgrade. Getting to go live in Norway.
It's which was that's another great analog. The sort of the Wild Hunt paired with the sort of the way that stars can spiral out of control.
The Wild Hunt was the original Lost Weekend. And I won't be taking any further questions about that. Yeah, and I also liked the bonfires as literalizations of the circles that you run in old Hollywood. Like
Right.
who you're friends with is just so key. Where who you can get information from and about whom, and who's on the ins and who's on the outs. It's just like literal bonfires, and the bonfires take up the sort of are take up the symbolic weight of the people who run them and own them out on the studio lot.
Yes.
Everybody has their own fiefdoms underneath the big fiefdom.
Right, and then you also just get this great visual image of basically an endless, suddenly the sun sets and there's this sort of endless field of bonfires, and
Yeah, which
outside of
reflects
their light, there's literal
the endless
monsters.
sea of stars above, which is where you literally go if you ascend
Yes.
as part of this system.
Yes.
But yeah, no, it's all really it's all really clever. I love the idea of, when the cameras were untamed, they would eat the color off of you and your voice, which is why films are black and white and silent. But now we've kind of got them a little bit more under control, so they only eat your color. And when she meets the old Count what's his name, the old Romanian actor, he is like black and white and can only like rasp, because he's been fed on by cameras so much. It's all great stuff. You could think maybe that, I mean, and this might be part of the sort of the difficulty that the third act has, is that one is led to expect that Luli will at some point become less selfish, but she doesn't. Like, her selfishness and her desire for fame are the absolute core of her character.
Yes. It's funny. I actually did not expect her to ever get less selfish. Because when do movie stars, when do celebrities, or when do rich people ever get less selfish?
Yeah, no, I mean, like the old woman who helps her get into it in the first place. It's like 20 years here, 20 years there.
And she points out to Lily that, look, if you succeed, you're going to be immortal, and if you don't think you're going to succeed, why are you doing this?
Right, exactly. So it's chump change for you, but yeah, she's still there, like bending her fire. I think that she may have been my absolute favorite part, because like one of the tropes of old Hollywood is these, what happens to the starlets, after
Right.
the studio system spits them and chews them up and spits them out, and there's this whole type of the dissipated old woman who can't let go of that moment in her past, living by herself in this old apartment, telling stories of the glory days to any pilgrims who happen to find her, and like making that into Baba Yaga essentially is a really good idea.
Right.
As is the woman who literally became a stand of trees after she.
Yes. Well, who's Daphne from Greek mythology?
Right,
Like,
exactly.
that was a great reference where it was like Daphne Grove. I was like, oh, that's going to be a tree. Because, Daphne was turned into a tree by Apollo, I think. And that's one of the things I really like about this book is that it's quite short, but it is just so jam-packed with detail and with things that could have been spun out into an entire book if, somebody felt the need to tediously explain every bit of them.
Yeah, no, the brevity is also just like spot on.
Right, like it's compact.
Yeah.
It's compact and efficient. Not reading like it's efficient. It reads, very beautifully. But you have Daphne, you have the dissipated old woman who cut off her own feet to get freedom from the studio system.
Little echo of the red shoes there, but no, not over determined, and
right, exactly. And you get you get the take off your shirt, take off your skin. You get Greta's entire Tam Lin retelling in like 2 or 3 chapters.
Who's Tam Lin, you ask? Well, none that go by Carter Hall, but they leave him a pledge. Either their mantles of green, or else their maidenhead. And don't get me started on that sly old Raynardine either.
There's just so much detail packed into this, and I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, and you really, you can see all the settings. I have my head's full of like images from the book. Uh, Also, I want to give it credit for good sex writing, which is not something that we are guaranteed to get in this podcast by any stretch of the imagination.
Yes.
But the like being in the back seat of a car, which of course magically appears from them, and them both having like too many clothes on, so it's like we're just sort of stuck in here doing our best. That was a really good scene. And speaking of complicated characters, I was like, okay, so how's this going to work? Because like I kept like wondering about whether this was going to be a Queer Desires: The Revolutionary Moment book, which it turned out to be, which I want to
Sort of.
come back to. Yeah, sort of. Which I want to come back to when I'm in our grumpy zone because I want to grump about the ending. But
I have mixed feelings about the ending.
yeah, I just I don't think it was bad, but I think that it could have been better. Is the short version.
All right. Well, we can save it for the grumpy zone, but
in the main, while I was watching the threads of the book go, and I was like, okay, so we've had books where the relationship with the white woman is doomed, and that's not the real revolutionary moment. So you have to have a relationship with the, there are no other Chinese women in this story that aren't related to the main character.
right
Until the very, very end, I should point out.
Yes, but then you move on to the Jewish woman.
You move on to the Jewish woman. I was glad to see the Jewish woman because I was like, with Wolf and Rose, I was like, what are we doing here? Not that it's not inaccurate, mind you, for the period, but like, that's one too many negatives, Isaac. But I was glad to see her and her suit, and
yes.
her, the invitation to, another art. I don't know if you actually are a fan, but But David Lynch came up to me in my mind a couple of times while I was reading this. Do you ever watch Mulholland Drive?
No, you have to remember I haven't. There's a stunning amount of movies I haven't seen.
Yeah, it's unusual for me to have seen that movie. I'm not like a David Lynch fan, but I would bet that is something of a touchstone here because that's sort of a lesbian Hollywood, sort of surreal Hollywood movie. And one of the major things that it has in common are like, really hallucinatory, digressive scenes of watching somebody perform. I'm thinking of the Vietnamese guy who eats his own heart while he's on, as a performer, or not eats his own heart, but produces his own heart while he's singing as a singer on the chop suey circuit. It's like, that's just a digression, and it's just and it's a really important one because it's, it shows us that there's magic everywhere and that, Luli has chosen to only look at one kind of magic and to pursue only one kind of fame. But
right.
But I really liked that, again, everything is so, concise that it's like we've gone out of Hollywood. We're going to see what is out of Hollywood. There's this magic that
we drive straight to San Francisco.
Right, exactly. Up the 101, or the one, and we may die because that's a classic Hollywood death, is driving off of that particular highway. But
yeah, and I don't know if it's so much if that scene that entire thing is so much of as it's not so much a digression as it's this, as you say, it's this moment. It's this potential turning point for Luli. It's this point where she could go, she could reconnect with her sister in a sort of deeper way and reconnect with the sort of there's all of this immortality and magic and art happening in San Francisco's Chinatown. There's this sort of opportunity. She doesn't have to have this, and she has broken free and she chooses to go back to it. And that's kind of where that's kind of where this stops being if it ever was a book about a revolutionary force, because there's no revolution there. I mean, the ending, which we can get to, has this power of queer desire, but that it's not a revolutionary power.
Yeah, no,
It's like she's actually, to bring Utena into it. It's like she actually gets the shining thing.
Where do you go to find your scene? And where do you go when the scene moves on? When the town you poured your heart into and the source of all your magic becomes just one of a list of names in a Vampire Weekend song. Yeah, which is, more, and how satisfying you find that, maybe a sort of a personal reaction more than anything else. But you're absolutely right. And I think it's also, the other important element that whole sequence brings in is you spend like a good half of the book in this, like, stuck in the studio, the academy, if we're going to be, using Utena language.
Sorry, everyone.
But we, stuck in this suffocating sort of magical, shape-changing space like the academy in Utena, where, one guy calls the shots. And even though there's also plenty of other hazards, and it's like, okay, this person owns my soul. And in Utena, of course, the answer is just leave. And in this, the answer is also just leave, because even though, sure, this guy owns my soul, but I can actually just drive up the coast and he doesn't have any power if I go outside of LA. So, the door was there the whole time. And
but then she turns around and goes back.
Exactly. That's like the key character moment for her. It's like she's not going to stay. She's going to write to Luli, maybe. To formerly Luli, now
Mary.
Somebody else. Mary, yeah.
Mary is her sister's new name.
I think that she changed her name again after she went to San Francisco, but I don't remember.
Oh, I think you may be right. I think you're right.
That demonstrates that she's working towards something else. She isn't interested in bringing down the studio system. She may be interested in fucking over particular people within the studio system who she doesn't like. But even
right, she doesn't.
Presumably, even the director who she hates and who hates her is going to get, a massive amount of credit for directing the movie that birthed a star.
Right.
So like she's in there.
Right, and it's this moment where the girl who previously had been like, yes, but what if you'd taken the director's chair while he was unconscious? What if you woke up as this new person after you've, tricked him out of his skin and beat him with willow switches? And the first thing that this new person sees is you behind the desk. She's gotten all the things that she went in wanting, but she's lost like the extra ambition that she could have had.
She got everything she wanted, and she lost everything she had. We're about to go down to the grumpy zone, but you don't gotta look at me like that. Yes, there is that. And she sort of, there is that, that sort of bittersweet element to it. I think that like my sort of complaint about the ending, if we want to, let's wait.
Yeah, let's just.
I'm going to continue to tease.
Let's just jump.
Go ahead.
Let's just jump. Let's just keep talking about the ending because I have other stuff I want to say about it. So get your grumpy in now.
Okay, so like the ending of the sort of the climax of the film is that she kisses her ex, who is
on screen, who's supposed to be killing her.
Right. So this movie, which has been written by a lesbian who's going under a man's name, the Jewish lesbian writer who is going under a Goyish man's name, because that's the whole theme of the piece. Originally, the movie was going to end with so she's playing the monster in a series of monster movies where Captain Nemo
Siren, in fact,
is fighting the Siren, and so this is monster movie stuff. And every time Captain Nemo defeats the Siren, she comes back to haunt his descendants or whatever. And the original ending of this movie was that Captain Nemo was going to sacrifice himself in order to break this cycle, which would have been one story. But the director, because of a fire, allows the star of the film to escape from
die. I mean, he dies.
No, he escapes.
I definitely think he dies.
Okay, I'm willing to go there. So she saw a ghost later
Yes.
on when I mean, to the extent that matters in this universe.
When she goes to this films thing, she says a few years later, and this book is being, she says a few years earlier, and this book is being narrated when she's already dead and in the sky as a star. Like, it is not dead, but she's already this like immortal goddess in the sky as a star. So
right.
Harry, who's much older than her, would not have been alive regardless. Except that it's her, so it's definitely his ghost she sees in the theater, and all of the sightings of him, like he leaves his car behind when he goes off into the fire, but he's sighted with his car. On like one of the, I swear, when I was hitchhiking, I get picked up and, got a ride all the way to Vegas from him.
So it's his way out one way or another.
It's his way out. We also get the foreshadowing earlier of talking about a boy who throws himself into the fires.
Did Utena die at the end of Utena, or is she merely somewhere else? Need a drowned prince to get the desired results.
And then we see Harry, whose boyfriend has left him, who's being forced into a studio marriage. With a starlet who's, clearly on a bit of a self-destructive turn. And he walks into the fire ostensibly to save her and the other movie staff people. And, the only other times he's ever seen, it's in improbable situations where he vanishes, as soon as he turns the corner. Like, he dies.
But in this universe,
he dies, but...
Yeah.
Right, but in this universe, nobody is ever completely dead while they are remembered. And basically any kind of memory is immortality. So, his spirit lives on.
It functions for him as an escape. But yes, I get what you're saying. Like, in real terms, he commits a Hollywood suicide. Yes. But anyway, we digress.
And just like his character was supposed to be doing in the movie, I'll note.
Yes.
Sacrificing himself.
So the old white man, albeit an old gay white man,
who is her gay mentor.
Yeah, but he, who has obviously done some horrible things to get to the position where he has, because absolutely everybody in this, in this system has done.
But he's as close as we're gonna get to the token decent guy.
Yeah, he falls on his sword, and his sacrifice allows a woman to be the hero. So he is replaced by his quote unquote daughter, who is Luli's ex-girlfriend, the beautiful girl who's kayfabe from from France, but is in fact from Michigan or from the Midwest.
And your blonde-haired, blue-eyed, extremely white girl.
Indeed, her whiteness is perhaps her defining feature.
Yes.
And so the lesbian screenwriter who has now gotten a hold of this in movie and rewrite has crafted an ending where the siren is finally killed. Her pride is broken. It's not like she's not coming back for another one, folks.
Because she's not dying defiant, hissing hate. She's she dies a broken, pleading creature begging for her life from
and the saintly white woman forgives her and then kills her. Which is if you want to read it as a racial allegory, which these films certainly have a racial allegory aspect to them, a kind of a horrific ending, which Luli tells the screenwriter, who she is also sleeping with. But as a last minute, sort of rewrite, because the director who hates her is doing this, and so they've made her crawl in her belly and plead for her life.
One of the directors because the original series of movies is co-directed by two brothers, and one of the brothers just vanishes. The evil lawyer shows up and escorts him away, and he's never seen again.
Yes, the studio punishes him for letting the man escape by disappearing him.
Yes.
Probably hollowing him out, turning him into a nodder.
Yes.
But instead, a revolutionary moment is seized, or a non-revolutionary moment is seized. Luli's apotheosis is achieved because she and the white hero, virginal, savior woman, have a passionate kiss as opposed to the chaste kiss that they were supposed to have.
Right. Well, on film.
Because of the magical rules of this universe, that allows her to, that moment is so star-making, so powerful that they can't afford to cut it out. Presumably it's like lightning in a bottle, so she becomes a star, literally.
Yeah. Right. Well, and that basically in the rules of this universe say that when you hit the moment that is going to make you a star, you literally incandesce, and are like dripping silver glowing stuff, and glowing yourself and setting everything around you on fire.
So, like, this is the place where it sort of diverges from history in a certain way, because I don't believe that we had any, big lesbian kisses as part of the main film canon in the 30s.
No, I mean, the way that I took it to be was that, that probably in the final, the film, it's still edited to look like mostly a chaste kiss, but it gets rediscovered and like reworked into the history of gay cinema later, and that's what sort of gives her a new burst of immortality.
And she becomes a star on those grounds. Yeah.
Well, no, I mean I think no, she becomes a star. She becomes a star largely on the just sheer charisma that she's managed to accumulate through all of a combination of all of her hard work and the like power of this kiss. But that a lot of it, she becomes a star because that moment proves to the studio and to the sort of the universe that she has that like reality bending charisma now. And so
she becomes too valuable to discard her. Right.
Right. It doesn't really matter what happens in that movie. She's going to appear in many, many movies afterwards, because she's got, she has tapped that magic. And the fact that, that this film, which is sort of one of her kind of, considered probably her first big break, but, still a B monster movie. This film later resurfaces as this sort of important thing for young queer kids watching it on, for like old cult movie night.
Okay. I think that could have been fleshed out a little better. Like that whole arc of it. But then again, here's my pet theory, right? Here's my headcanon as to what almost certainly would have happened under these circumstances. An Asian woman who is a star, like who is a genuine star and who specializes in playing monsters, what is she going to be doing during World War II?
Horrible propaganda.
Correct. So she's going to be playing Japanese spy vamp woman for like in film after film after film for years. And like I feel like she doesn't want to talk about that.
Yeah.
At this point.
Particularly because her life partner is a Japanese American woman who, comes out of Manzanar, strikes her own devil's bargain with the producer.
It took me 4 days to hitchhike from Manzanar, and frankly, ain't that America?
And and it's sort of implied that that it's the movies that Jane makes that really are what make that really like cement her star status.
Right. And that is a whole different kettle of fish as far as when a female Japanese director would be making star-making movies, which is why I feel like this sort of
yes.
We are deviating slightly from history as we know it. But anyway, go on.
Yeah, possibly. But honestly, I don't know enough about Hollywood to know, because there's always weird exceptions.
That's true. There are, but that aside, like I feel like that particular like making that woman Japanese American is a choice, you know, and not talking about the war is a choice.
Right.
And so I feel like there's this big sort of okay, then I became a star and that's it. It's happy ending for me. And then like
Right.
it's like then what, that what happened, how did you actually make your money? And um and so it's like I think that I'm fine with playing that out in my head, right? And it's a sign of a good story, that it's rich enough that you can sort of scoop up the rules of this world and look at like how things probably went down afterwards and have fun theories about it. But I think that allowing a little bit more of that darkness into the final act of the book might have helped.
Yeah. I mean, I think that this is unfortunately one of the things that's always difficult when you're dealing with a somewhat unreliable narrator.
Right.
And like we get hints of the ways in which she's an unreliable narrator when you get like Jane's little interjections.
Yes, you do.
And
You would think that Jane might have something to say about that whole thing, but maybe not.
well, this is where she's choosing to end the story. But there's an interesting thing. Even setting the sort of how is this going to play out if this America ends up still looking pretty much like our America of the 40s and 50s, which is it's not necessarily a good ending. I mean, like a happy ending. I mean, she's immortal,
Right.
but who's she? She's immortal, but that means that she's up there in the sky and she can come down to earth pretty much on the strength of other people's memories of her. So she's completely tied to the past, and she's up there in the sky. So her her life partner, the director, isn't up there. Her first like serious long-term relationship with the writer, Tara's not up there. The person, she's stuck up there with her ex-girlfriend and like a bunch of these other people who were kind of horrible to be around throughout the book. Like that's her company for eternity.
Yes.
Like that's the price of immortality. Is this book does a good job of there's so many different forms of immortality and they all just kind of suck.
Yeah, no, there definitely is that.
They're all sad and static,
Yeah.
and the really brilliant people don't have access to them. They might have access to different kinds of immortality that we're not seeing, the writers and the artists. But like, the people who chase after her father's medicines.
I like
And,
that. And it's like
Yeah.
there's a whole different metaphorical structure that supported that in the old country, but it doesn't work here.
And it still works somewhat. It still works. It just doesn't work for It won't buy you centuries. It'll buy you an extra couple of years.
Right, exactly, because there isn't the larger social structure to support that memory, that legend, which being a legend is such a huge part of this. And since memory and forgetting is the core of this, I just wanted to.
Oh, I was just going to say that her mother, who is much more culturally adaptable and just pragmatic in general, while she also doesn't have access to immortality, has much more powerful and effective magic than her father, partly because, her father is still stuck in a context that, it's a context he's choosing not to go back to, but also, isn't really working for him here either.
Yeah, I like her mother as a character a lot, even though she doesn't get a lot of screen time. Just her, as you said, her practicality and her ability to adapt. But also, was she not American born and raised, unlike her husband?
She is. She is American
yeah.
born and raised.
So that's a different kind of perspective
Right,
that she would
but
have.
it's worth noting that that her father, Lily's grandfather, comes over from China and is and manages to be a very adaptable working on the railroad and does quite well by himself until poor
he's eaten by a
worker
mountain,
safety
which
ends up.
he's
eaten by a mountain, but until then he's doing quite well.
Yes, but this is.
But like everybody gets eaten by something dark and terrifying in this book.
Many true, many native-born generations back Americans also get eaten by mountains all the time. You know, that's part of the American experience, particularly if you're digging for coal or railroad tunneling.
Or blasting tunnels through mountains to lay railroad track,
Yeah,
which I believe is what's. Yeah, I mean, well, and it's kind of the fate of almost everybody in this book, is to get eaten by something dark and terrible.
indeed. To turn to go around, I was going to mention that because this book is all about mortality, memory, and forgetting. It's like, maybe one of the big reasons that the war is barely talked about is that we did such a bang up job, or we tried as hard as we could to forget about the internment in America, to the extent that the memory of all of that really had to be deliberately resurrected years and years later. But yes, I wanted to quickly touch on the gay equals monster thing,
Yes,
which the book does a
which
lot,
is quite
and
yes, quite literally when she. Well, I mean, because there's a lot of moments where monster can be gay or it can be non-white. But there's the entire conversation she has with Harry where they're both like, "Yep, we're monsters because we're gay."
yes, I just think of him as Rock Hudson, the famously gay and closeted Hollywood superstar of this
I
period.
believe that there were a lot of famously gay and closeted Hollywood actors
Oh
in
yeah,
that
no,
period, though.
100%. But that's just the one that was closest to the top of my head. But yes, no, sort of. Her monstrousness is multivalent, and this book does a really good job. Unlike, for example, books that only dwell on one aspect of these things, uh, balancing her, the gender part of it, the race part of it, the orientation part of it, and the money part of it, all of which are interconnected, and but the and sort of her bonding with him is that they are both this kind of monster themselves, and Harry seems to think that his when his boyfriend leaves him and he is up for the studio marriage, he takes it as, well, of course this has happened to me. I'm a monster. I don't get
Right.
true love forever. That's not what I can reasonably expect for my life. What I can expect is to die in a fire, or
Right.
meet some other tragic end, or live a lie. And if there is sort of if there is a hopeful element to this book, it's like the way that that sort of inherent monstrousness isn't questioned necessarily over the course of this book, but we do contrast that with the world that we live in now, and but we don't really see any sort of, I guess it's implied that Luli ends up with Jane, and that's sort of a long-term happy relationship.
And she flat out says that, so.
Yeah, I mean, but of course this is also the extent that Luli can experience happiness as what she has become.
Right.
Which is an immortal kind of vampiric monstrous being in a way. So
Yes, what's the shade of lipstick that Jane has designed for her to show up well in camera? It's called Incarnate or something.
yeah, Incarnadine, the flesh red, yes. The word incarnadine means blood red, and I learned that from a webcomic called Nature of Nature's Art, which you should not read. Yeah, no, it's a good book, and it's one of those careful about fighting with wizards lest you become one kind of a story.
Right. This is
as well.
Yeah, though again, she doesn't even quite become a wizard. She becomes somebody who's powerful enough to go toe to toe with the wizards and, demand things from them. But
still a thrall.
that only happens Right. She becomes, she gives in to the wizard. And she's able to do so. her triumph is that she's able to do so on her own terms. But it's still, in some ways, this is still a story of being corrupted. I mean, she was always sort of eager to be corrupted. She stole her sister's name without much. But, you get glimpses of somebody who had, who was not willing to just take all of that. Like she instead of keeping the pictures that the first director takes of that young woman, she could have kept them, she could have and possibly should have kept them for blackmail, but she burns them. Thus freeing this young woman's spirit, which is another one of these things that could have been an entire story on its own, and sort of happens in the background.
Like, that feels folkloric, but I actually was like, really, just by taking nude photos of this woman, he's destroyed her? Is that...
It's not just nude photos. No, it's the old story that, that a photograph steals your soul.
No, I know that, but it's also like,
right. The thing is that, it's also, he's got blackmail material on her, and
yeah, that's sort of I guess the more pressing bit is like if she tries to re-enter the business,
right? But it's also right, but I mean it's also that there's this sort of that it's the idea is that something has been taken from her, and it isn't even because it's not even just the nude photos. He also takes clothed photos of her. But, something has been taken from her. And because this is a fairy tale, burning the photos gives her some of that back. Right. In the real world, it wouldn't. But I mean, that's kind of part of the thing of the book is that is that to some degree, adding like horrific monsters and people who, things that try to lure you into the dark and, toothy, slimy things that come out of the fountains. The actual effect is to make a Hollywood that's somewhat less awful than, the one that really existed.
True.
Because, it's the one where she can, she can harness this incandescent power and bargain back.
It's one where there are arcane rules that bite both ways as opposed to the real, which I guess is part of my, sort of, with the ending is like, I'm... As a cynical person, I have my eyes out for cheats, if you see what I mean.
Right. No, and I definitely agree. But at the same time, one of the things I really like about this book is the fact that it gives you the cheats, but then it doesn't actually make it gives you the cheats, but they don't actually make you actually win. All this does is give you, it means that people can have power in the system, but it doesn't actually allow you to break out of the system. And I think that in some ways this ends up making the book feel more true than some of the other books we've read.
Yeah. I agree.
It's, and I think that for me, I mean, I felt like the ending was a little rushed. I felt like, it definitely skipped a few steps of, I would have liked to have been, more sold on. I'm willing to be convinced that a young woman can walk out of Manzanar and strike a bargain with the Fairy King and become a director, but I would have liked to some hint, some indication of how. But
yeah, well, I mean,
at the same time,
there are a bunch. This thing is just chock full of stories that aren't the story that we're telling that would be fascinating to look into, and I would love to have this, setting revisited if the author wanted to,
Yes, but I think I'd have been a lot grumpier about the ending if this had, really fundamentally changed anything. But the best she gets is her own fire, where she can make things a little better for, the young queer kids who come after her. But none of them are getting, there's no liberation here.
Yeah.
And that includes for future generations. And if there's going to be any real true liberation, it's going to have to come from somebody who's not, who's not willing to bend all of her willpower into, succeeding inside these rules. And so for me, that makes the ending a little bit more satisfying. If, still, like, it's a bit of a downer, but it's still, But it's satisfying because she gets the arc, she gets her triumph, which we definitely want after, she's had to deal with all these terrible men. But it still doesn't, she gets her triumph and then it continues a little bit longer, which in some books could have been, wrapping up everything neatly, and instead in this one sort of creates more loose ends and shows you that triumph doesn't solve everything.
True. I guess what I would have wanted, like the actual thing that I would have wanted, was her arriving at some additional reflectiveness about, the prices that she's paid.
Yeah, but Lily's just not that kind of person.
Exactly.
She's just not a self-reflective kind of person.
Yeah. I guess that was probably what I was reaching out for when I felt somewhat dissatisfied with the ending. And you're right, though. That would have been a cheat in and of itself. So I think that you've actually talked me around to liking the ending more than I originally did.
That's good.
Yeah. And once again, I'm a dope who believes unreliable narrators.
Yeah. No, I think it's I like my main qualm with it is just, again, that the pacing, the pacing lags in places. There's occasionally I reach a point where I was like, okay, it feels like it's taking forever for her to get any traction, and I mean that works. That is very true of what's going on with her, but also it starts to get a little bit, and then it picks up again, which is nice.
Sure.
But
this book
is
just as you point out, short, but it actually feels longer than it is because of stuff like that.
Right, but part of also why it feels longer than it is just because it's so full of stuff. It doesn't most of the time it doesn't feel like a slog.
Right.
Just occasionally it does sort of drag a bit. And but like you, I would totally read more in this world.
Absolutely, and I'm glad to have found this author through this podcast, because I think that she's a real interesting, and I'm really happy. I'm excited to see what she comes up with next.
Yeah, I mean, she still feels like she's had a few novellas. The third book in the Singing Hills cycle is apparently coming out either this year or next, which I'm super excited about.
Awesome. I will read that whether we do it for the podcast or not.
Yeah, I mean, I think appropriately enough, I feel like she's a bit of a rising star in science fiction right now, and I'm really excited to see her future work.
One last little note that I want to make, and this is very self-indulgent, so bear with me. Our reading this book happened to coincide with the fall of Vince McMahon, who. I mean,
who?
If you want a reality warping empire run by one person, who does horrible things to his female employees,
you could very much write a similar kind of book to this set in the world of pro wrestling.
It's not pro wrestling, it's the WWE, and they did it on purpose to the industry. One could.
It would be a different book.
It would be.
It would be a very different book. It would have a very different tone. But I feel like you could definitely do it.
But give up your name, you might get molested. You might, all kinds of terrible bargains might be paid. There are stories which are still coming out. But it's like, this was I think he was maybe the last and the most visible of the people who at least could do this out in the open.
It's true. Pro wrestling kind of is, in some ways, was like the last vestige of that old studio system.
Yes, and I think that it's that gave the book an extra sort of layer for me, and I am turning over my head what a story like this, but about wrestling would look like. But that is probably something that I will never end up actually doing. But I thought of it first. It's August 7th, 2022. Regardless, what are we doing next week, Alexis?
That is a good question. We will probably do short fiction roundup. Fiction roundup.
Probably that next time around. Until then,
And if not, then this entire thing will have been edited out to say something else instead. Maybe.
I'm going to say the words "the abyss surrounds us," in case I need
just
to put them.
In case.
Just in case I need to stick them in.
I mean, it could also be "Slow River" by Nicola Griffith.
There are many options, but you'll only ever find out about one.
Thank you, everyone.
Goodbye.
Bye.